Hey, Rylan here at the Vic Shop. Today I want to talk about shifting issues. I've had a lot of calls come in recently and emails and texts, and that's a cue for me to make a video. And a typical customer complaint would be my bike it's not shifting right, like the shifter gets stuck, or maybe it only shifts to first or not to second, third, fourth, fifth, or maybe it only shifts from 1 to 2, or just weird shifting issues. What I would do first if that bike rolled into my shop is put it on the lift and start inspecting the outer part of the engine and the shifter. The most notably, I would say a vast majority of shifting issues can be attributed to this linkage, the heim joints, and the arm that comes off of here, and the angle of all this. This is so critical that all these pieces have the correct angle. And you may think, well, geez, what's a 10 degrees difference? And that can make quite a bit of difference. So the position and then the condition of these components. Let me zoom in a little bit. Let's see. We can go farther than that. There we go. So first thing to note is this bike has been set up improperly, which may explain why the clutch is out of it. This foot peg or shifter setup was basically the same from 2003 all the way up to 17. They had different styles of mounts, that pushed it fore or aft. But the long and short of it is they all bolt up here. These two bolts are the same throughout, whether you had, a floorboard or a peg or a low peg or an extended peg. That's all the same. The most critical thing, which I see happen the most often, is this arm is not clocked correctly. So if you look in the tech manual, you'll see that this arm should be clocked. I'm trying to jam it on there. Right about the 630 position. And you'll know you've got it correct because there's a little dimple punched into this arm, and there's a little dimple punched into the shaft that goes into the primary cover here. And those should be lined up, and it should be just a little past 6 o'clock, and that's normal. And if you've got a bike that I've seen this quite a bit where it's all, 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, or conversely, if it's back here, that is a huge problem and could definitely cause a shifting issue. And you may think, oh, geez, what's the difference between this and this? Quite a bit, actually. So that's the first thing I'm going to look for, is that if this is clocked correctly. And what you may end up with is you reclock it correctly, and then the shifter part here, then this part is no longer correct. Such as the way it is now. This is correct. It's all bolted in there. The arm is 630, but this is way down. There's no way you can get your foot underneath that. And the way to adjust that would be the shift rod. And the shift rod is another common area where problems occur. Specifically the ball end, the heim joints here. Man, I don't know how many shifting issues I've fixed by just lubing these up. And if you get down there and you feel that these are a little bit tight or whatever, you can see that they're corroded, don't just hit it from a few feet away with some WD-40. Actually take it apart, bring it to your bench, get a rag and some cleaner and try to clean all the corrosion off of there, and then use a sprayed lubricant, something that's actually a lubricant. Like WD-40, for example, isn't necessarily a lubricant. It does have lubricant properties, but there are better lubricants on the market, preferably something that's not going to leave a film and so it would gather dust. But I had a guy call me the other day, and he says, yeah, it's having problems shifting. I gotta like double tap it with my foot, it's sticking and all this and all that. And I'm thinking about going into the primary and replacing the shifter pawl, which is something that could happen. You need to replace this. But I said, well, what's the history in the bike? He's like, oh, it's a 2016 model with like 7,000 miles on it. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think that you have an internal problem. And I said, it's probably external. And then he texted me back a day later and he says, yep, just lubing those ball ends was enough to fix his problem. And the interesting thing also that I said to him is, I said, make sure there's no aftermarket components. What is super common is someone to replace this rod, which is adjustable, with an aftermarket rod, which may not have any adjustment at all, or has the incorrect adjustment, or is just plain wrong. I had one a month or two ago where instead of a rod, they had this big piece of stylized metal, and the metal was getting like hung up on here. Someone had just like made it in a garage or whatever, like, oh cool, instead of a rod I got this cool shaped piece of metal. And yeah, it looked cool except for it's hanging up, and it left the dude stranded, like hours from home, and turned into a real big problem. And it was as simple as, dude, you've got like the wrong setup here. And so that's extremely important, that these joints be clean and lubricated, that this be at the 630 position, the marks are lined up. If you really want to get deep into it, you can pull this peg support off and lubricate the shaft and the shifter itself. And all of that is going to go a long way. And then naturally, this leads us into a bike with like floorboards, like a Vision or a Cross Country. And as you can see, some years, like this 16 had this real spindly shaft here, which is a lot less robust than a different year, like on this Judge. And I've seen these where they'll bend. A guy's got it adjusted wrong, it's shifting poorly, and then he's jamming on it with his foot enough to bend the dang rod. And then it's possible that you could replace the rod. On these Vision and Cross Country floorboard setups, they are adjustable. You can slide the mount for the shifter fore and aft in these 3 positions. And then, of course, you're going to need to make up for that by adjusting the length of the rod here. And something to note on the rod is that one end is threaded normally and the other end is a reverse thread. And that enables you to unlock these 2 lock nuts and then just twist this to change this angle. And so therefore, one side's got to be a reverse thread and the other side's got to be normal thread. And if you found that there's not enough adjustment in this, oftentimes I find that the rod is too long, and then I can just cut it down, and I don't have a reverse tap or die, so I can make reverse threads. But I do have a die that is the standard style thread, and if I had to make it shorter, I could cut off some from the standard side and rethread down. Now, they made a bunch of different rods over the years. I wish I had a better way to say, oh, this rod from this certain model and year is 10 inches, and this rod from this certain model and year is 9 inches, and I just don't have that. I just over the years, I built up a collection of shift rods. Just, a guy gets one replaced, or parting out a bike or something. So I just got like an assortment, and I just kind of sift through my assortment to get the right rod if I find that I need one that's drastically longer or shorter. But for you at home, if you determine that, oh man, my rod is longer or shorter than it needs to be to get all these angles correct, you could get on eBay and just find someone that's parting out a bike, and hopefully they'll give you a measurement on the rod and say, there could be a drastic adjustment where you'd need 2-inch difference or whatever, and hopefully your eBay seller would be able to take a tape measure and just sort that out. So the adjustment, the angle, this angle has to be right for your boot. That's going to be kind of common sense and what feels right to you. Typically, somewhere around that 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock kind of range. So next thing is on these floorboards, and I talked about the pivot, and we've got this pivot here. They had different styles over the years. Earlier floorboards would have like this hex. Let's see what we got here. This hex, and it's got a bushing, and that's how, you know, that would work. And that's an earlier style, and these bushings can wear out over time. Actually, what I find will wear out is the hex on the inner side of the shifter. But it's real important that we keep these lubricated and in good shape, and that I've spoken of this in other videos. This slop is normal and it needs to be there. What's common is a guy will have a shifting issue, is he's got some issue with the length of the rod or the angle, but he doesn't know that yet. And so he goes and he buys these brass shifter bushings because he says, wow, that's got a lot of slop in it. And that's the way they came out from the factory. The problem with these brass bushings, these aftermarket ones, is that they're not machined correctly, and you'll put them in there and this thing will be locked up tight. And I've had plenty of guys make their problem worse with those bushings, and they will, like, let's say this angle is off because they've adjusted the shifter location and it's not shifting correctly, and they go, oh, instead of knowing to fix that, they think, oh, it's probably got something to do with this looseness. I'm gonna put, you know, these brass bushings in there. They put them in there, it's super tight. Now it really won't shift. And I've had guys even smoke their clutch because they got out in the middle of nowhere. It refuses to shift. They try to make their way home. So you can see how a problem could snowball. You know, you've got simple adjustments, you know, like if this was a few teeth off, this is free, it's quick, it's easy. It requires a minimum amount of tools and knowledge, and problem solved. But if you didn't know that, you may put the bushings in, try to ride it, it's not shifting correctly, maybe you screw up the clutch, you end up replacing parts, you open up the primary, and now you're having problems getting the primary. I mean, it can just snowball. So try to work slowly and methodically before you go doing surgery on these. I have the solution if you're like, oh, I've got a bike, it's got 80,000 miles on it, and these are worn out, which can happen. Then they have to be either taken to, you have to machine them. I put them in the lathe. I've heard guys that don't have a lathe will put them on some sandpaper and sand them down and, you know, hog out the centers until they fit, and then you're kind of like in the same boat. Sure, if your bike had a ton of miles on it and it's legitimately worn out, then it's probably going to make up this slop. But what I see a lot of times is a guy's like, well, it's got 12,000 miles on it, or 15, or 22,000, which in my opinion is really low mileage, and then there's not a thing wrong with this, and it's a waste of time and money. And you're skipping past the other problem, which was something in the angle or the lubrication was the issue. So we got the old style floorboard thing with the hex. You got the new style, which is just uses these round bushings and a bolt. Just a side note, I mentioned this earlier, is that all the bolt spacing on all these from 99 all the way to 17, every Victory ever created except the Octane shares the same bolt pattern, and so it's pretty easy to swap out pegs to floorboards, floorboards to pegs. Oh, like for example on my old 2001 here, I've got like 03 to 17 Vegas controls on that, and you can see that they also require the Vegas style brake master cylinder and stuff. And let's look at the other side. You know, I just got some controls and powder coated them and found the right shift rod linkage and made all that work. So that's stuff with the linkage. Another thing that's pretty common is the angle on this shift arm here. When it's correct, it should be just past the primary. I'm sorry there's not a cover on here, but it'll be kind of lined up with that decorative cover. And if your clutch starts to go out, a lot of times this will be way down here or way back here, and you can say to yourself, or you've just got this bike and you're wondering, you know, what the story is with the shifting. If it's not here, if it's back here or up here, that's a problem and can indicate a clutch issue. And nonetheless, we start with all the external linkage stuff, and then we move to the clutch adjustment. And I've talked about this in other videos. This cable is not adjusted correctly, so this bike's getting parted out. But nonetheless, when you put it all together, if I can do this with one hand. Nope, gotta use two. So this angle is not correct, but the right amount of free play to have in this is just a little bit right in the apex of that corner. It should just have a little bit of play right there. And of course, again, that's going to be up in that direction. Okay, so we got a bike, the shifting issue. I've verified that this angle is all correct, and these are all freed up, and you know, all the angle of the shifter is good. This is nice and free. All that seems to check out. Then I'll move to the clutch arm there and make sure that it's adjusted correctly and it's got the right free play and it's not way out or way back or something like that. Also, in pretty rare instances, if you take the cable off, and you may notice that this is really tight to turn, and it's got this retaining pin here, you know, that allows it to come in and out of the block. And sometimes there's a misalignment with how that works, and it should be free and clear. There's no clutch in this, so that's why I'm able to freely move this. But let's dive deeper. So again, please double check the quick, easy, free things like the linkages before you go and do surgeries, like opening up the primary. And then, of course, I'm gonna check that. Let's see where my bit went. Okay, so once the external things are squared away, I'm going to take the primary off, which of course I've simplified here for the video. And then when you pull the primary off, it's going to come with this shifter pawl, will more than likely come with it. And you can see on the back, it's got this centering spring. There we go. And then take a note of the end of the spring here. That is correct. So when you're trying to, when you order this part, it's not going to come with this spring. It'll have this little tiny spring. And what I see a lot of the times is the tiny spring just wears out. It loses its tension. The most common complaint when that happens is bike shifts great when it's cold. As soon as the engine oil heats up, it shifts like dog crap until it cools off again. And then I will put this thing in there, and it's my belief that that spring wears out. I have seen people on the internet have bikes where this tooth section is worn out. I haven't really experienced that in my shop. But nonetheless, so this, when you put it back together, this hole in the block here, or this boss that's in the block here, is going to go around the center here with the spring around it. And then this thing I pointed out earlier is going to go through that dowel pin, like so. Hopefully that all makes sense. This is a common piece to replace. Guys will oftentimes totally forget about the linkages and the heim joints and all that stuff and just go right to the to this, which, you know, I don't recommend, but these can wear out, and that would be the next logical step after all the external things are looked at. And then since you're here, you could do the clutch. Again, the clutch is missing on this bike, but it's a great opportunity to look into the clutch, which could, if the clutch was going bad, potentially cause these shifting issues. So I think that's it. Yeah, man, I've fixed a ton of bikes by just doing adjustments and cleaning, lubricating on these, so don't skip that. And the other thing was the guy that I fixed. He had a foot peg set up like this. I said, do you have any aftermarket stuff? And he says, nope, it's stone stock. I'm like, are you sure? Because send me pictures. And sure enough, he had an aftermarket peg elongation kit on there, which is fine. But it came with an aftermarket shift rod and the ball joints on the end. And the aftermarket one was just didn't have as good a corrosion resistance, and it was all jacked up. But had he not sent me the picture, we would just assume that it was stock. And a lot of times that happens. It wasn't so critical in this case, but a lot of times the guy will say, oh, it's stone stock. No one's ever touched it, when in fact it has aftermarket components on there. And a lot of aftermarket components cannot have the same quality as stock. So crux of the argument here is check that outside stuff first, and before you dive into the interior. Otherwise, enjoy. Happy wrenching.